Okay, we're now moving on to the next Siman. We are up to Siman Kuf Chav Tes, the halachis of Rosh Hashanah. So we went on from Elul, and now we're moving on to the halachis of Rosh Hashanah. So number one, before we start, just as a introduction, the davening of Rosh Hashanah itself, the first night of Rosh Hashanah, was a very, very important davening. We know that all the Rabbeim, the first night was probably the most important tefillah of the year. And if you think about what's happening during that time, that tefillah, the entire world, literally the world over, is in a very shaky, precarious place, because we know that the chayis that Hashem gives for the year it's on a clock. It lasts for 1 year. So as soon as Rosh Hashanah by night starts, it's kind of temporary. We're not really settled in. The next day when we blow shofar and the Eibishter accepts it, so then it kicks in. So, but the night before, the whole world hasn't yet gone there yet. Maybe in Australia they did, I guess. They blew shofar already. But the idea is that at night, when before the mitzvah of blowing shofar is applicable, so the world is still kind of like shaky. So therefore, I don't know if that's why, but that's one of the yanim of the davening Friday night. Used to take the first night of Yom Tov, used to take the Rabbeim hours and hours, and people would stay way after they finished. It would take 3-4 hours, if not even longer, and they would sit and the people would listen, and they would, and they would listen to the Rabbeim. It says that they would push it. Everything was wet with tears, side their clothing, side the floor around them, everything. It was a very, very big, a big time. And in general, the avodah of then, as the Frierdiker Rebbe writes, is that you're supposed to have charata on your previous year, and it's supposed to be a tshuva, meaning returning to the Eibishter during that time, me'umka deliba, from the depth of our hearts, and it's supposed to be mitoich kabbalah. That's the whole Rosh Hashanah in general, but it's magnified during that first few moments of Rosh Hashanah specifically. Now, one more nekuda, which we'll come to later about saying Tehillim before we start. So in general, you're supposed to say Tehillim every moment that you have. We'll get there later in the Siman. But there's another Inyan that before Ma'ariv, you're supposed to try to say Tehillim if you could. So I remember when I would come to 770 when I was a kid, people around me, and I would come before Mincha, people around me, you could see they've been sitting there for a while, and they already were halfway through Tehillim, if not even more. So there's definitely an Inyan before that was Mincha Ma'ariv, whatever, to try to say Tehillim in a way of tefillas. Now we'll get to later about the rest of Rosh Hashanah, but I'm just talking about before Rosh Hashanah even starts, that the Erev Rosh Hashanah in general, and specifically before Mincha, is you're supposed to be preoccupied with those types of things as saying Tehillim. Yeah. Okay, so let's begin. If everyone is ready, Sif Aleph. So Sif Aleph says like this, and this is everyone's familiar with this, hopefully. B'chol hakadeshim sha'emrim miRosh Hashanah ad Yom Kippurim. So during the Aseret Mitzvah, starting from Rosh Hashanah, the beginning of Rosh Hashanah, you already koiflin tevas le'ela. So you're supposed to, meaning in Shulchan Aruch it says, in the regular Shulchan Aruch it says, and the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch as well, that you're supposed to double over the word le'ela. The Hainu, what does that mean? Sha'omrim le'ela le'ela. You say le'ela twice. Now, according to most Girsois, it's beloy vav, without the vav of le'ela u'le'ela. But for us, it's according to the Alter Rebbe, Rabbeinu Kasav, the Alter Rebbe writes le'ela u'le'ela. Okay? Now, this is in the Shulchan Aruch of the Alter Rebbe. It's not the way we do it, but this is the Shulchan Aruch of the Alter Rebbe. Yeah. Now, where does this come? I'll explain soon what our minig is. Where does this come from? So this is from the Lavush. The Lavush was the Mordechai Yafeh. He wrote a bunch of svarim. His name was Mordechai. So he wrote a few svarim that have to do with like Mordechai, like the Lavush Malchus. So when it says when Mordechai went Lavush Malchus, when he was awarded as the thing. So he had his svarim. He writes similar things. I forgot all the names of them, but they're a play on the words of the clothing of Mordechai. But anyway, so he was called, maybe some of you are familiar with the famous Jaffe family from Manchester. They had an article about him, Zalman Jaffe, they had an article about him a couple of months ago, maybe in the Daher. I don't know if you guys saw it. He wrote a famous book of his encounters with the Rebbe, whatever. Anyways, the point is, so they're a descendant from this Mordechai Yafeh. Anyways, the Lavush writes like this, that during that time, the Eibishter is going higher and higher to positions of judgment. And he's judging the whole world, and especially the Yidden. So therefore, we want to kind of tap into where the Eibishter is. So we use the word le'ela u'le'ela also to show that we're going as high as we can. Now, again, we don't do this starting from Rosh Hashanah, even though that's what it says here. We'll get to that in a second. Yeah. So it's a good question. There's different elements of Hashem. So, for example, there are sometimes that Hashem is not magnified in the in the bechina of melech, let's say, right? The Eibishter is doing other things. So we know Moshe Rabbeinu, when he saw the Eibishter at different times, the Eibishter showed himself as different things. One time he was a person we mentioned by Slichus, that when Hashem said Hashem, Hashem, he was like a Shliach Tzibur with the talis. And then in Az Yashar we see that Hashem was the Ish Melchama. So there are different times that Hashem shows different attributes, if you will. So during this time, the Eibishter is in the attribute of Malchus. Malchus in general, or Malchus, but Shefet, like a judge, a melech that does mishpat. So therefore, that's a very high level of the way the Eibishter is relating to us. What that means is for your Chassidus class. But the idea of that it's not a regular sort of interaction, it's at a higher plane. So we want to match the Eibishter there, if that makes sense. Okay. Now the kivin shebekadish tzichem liya shmeina ve'esrim teves. Now the thing is, when it comes to kaddish, when it comes to nusach in general, it's very, very particular. We know that the Alter Rebbe says he looked through, I think it was over 90 or a few hundred, maybe it was a few hundred nuschos and sidurim, and he chose the one that was the most meduyik. So there are reasons behind certain things that we're not even always aware of. For example, kaddish has to have 28 words. So therefore, is there a siddur? Yeah. Okay, we'll get there in a second. But before I got one. Thank you. So before you got there, if you look in a, let's just take a quick look at a kaddish. So if you start going, from Yiskada Viskadash, I'll just start counting quickly. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28. 28 will get me till Yehesh Meid Abba. That's it. Now there's a long way to go. So if you look in the Poskim, they explain that you have to start your 28 from Yehesh Meid Abba. So you start counting from Yehesh Meid Abba to the end of Chatzi Kaddish. That's 28 words. I could do it again, but it's true. You can count it later if you want. Samachla. I'm sorry. From Yehesh Meid Abba and up. Okay. So and there's a reason why. Why is that? What's 28? Anyone know what 28 is? Yeah, there you go. 28 is I don't know. It's koyach maybe. I don't know. I don't know why it's a Kabbalistic thing. It was a Kabbalistic thing, but it has to be 28 words. So therefore, ubachol hashana oimrim le'ela min kol berchasa. So the whole year you say le'ela min kol berchasa. It doesn't equal 28?
It's 30 with the Imru Amen at the end.
Okay, so you have to take away V'imru Amen. The V'imru Amen is just a statement of V'imru Amen. We should say Amen.
Yeah.
Okay, so le'ela min kol berchasa is 4 words, but if we're doing le'ela, you made that 5 words. So what do? So therefore, so what you do is you lose a word. Instead of saying min kol, you could also use the word mikol, would be the same. You switch it to mikol instead of min kol. Now, if you look in the bottom where it says aleph over there in the bottom, the little of our minhagim. So over there it says what? The aleph on the bottom of page Taf Nun Ches. It says minagenu. What is our minig? The minig Chabad. It is she'ein koiflin le'ela b'kadish daseret simei tshuva. We do not say le'ela u le'ela except levad b'ne'ila, except when you come to ne'ila she'koiflin. Now it's based on, it's from the Shulchan Aruch as well. In the Magen Avraham, he quotes from the Arizal, I believe, that the Kabbalah from the Arizal was that we don't do that except for the end. So in the Shulchan Aruch of the Alter Rebbe, he says exactly like the regular Shulchan Aruch, that we do le'ela, u'le'ela, starting from the beginning of Rosh Hashanah. But in the Siddur, which the Alter Rebbe wrote later, and therefore we always follow the Pascha like the Siddur, the Alter Rebbe Vir wrote that we follow this Kabbalah from the Arizal, that we only do le'ela, u'le'ela on Ne'ilah itself. So even all the way to Yom Kippur, we don't do it except for that. Okay, let's go back there. Sit base. Yesh noegin liispalel bereish Hashana ubiyem Kippurim kol tefillah shmona esrei bekriya. Some people have a minhag that all the davenings of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, they daven b'kriya means bent, like stooped over, ubekfifas harosh, and with their head bent over. So bent over would be their back, b'kriya would be their back, and their head would be b'kfifas rosh. Now, if you look in the parentheses, it says kfifas rosh le'niska b'shulchan aruch rabbeinu. The Alter Rebbe doesn't say bending your head; he just mentions bending their back. Now, why do we do that? So obviously it's bedin, you're sitting in judgment, and therefore you're a little bit more, bittos. A little bit very similar, but here the opposite maybe. You're a little bit more humble. You're being judged, you're being a little bit more humble. Okay? Wait, now here's the thing. Before we go further, I just want to mention an interesting side point. Whenever we read in halacha certain things, minhagim, that have to do with how you behave, so it's hard to know. In general, Chassidus, Chabad is, or I should say Chabad rather, is not about chitzonius expressions. It's always about pnimius. So, for example, you see other Chassidim when they daven, they're shouting, they're rolling over, they're jumping, they're doing very excited things, and especially the Rebbe's, the Gute Yidin of other Kreisen, as they say. But when it comes to Lubavitch, it was never like that. From the times of the Alter Rebbe, it's always very, unispilus, as they would say, unispilus. Should be very calm. And there was once that the Mitzvah Rebbe got a little bit excited, and the Alter Rebbe, wasn't, he quieted him down. He said, unispilus. So we try not to do it. Now, when it comes to davening, certain things you're supposed to do. For example, how you bend at certain points, at certain places. So sometimes when you watch people doing these things, it's hard to know what's authentic and what's part of the show. Unfortunately, that's the way the Eibishter created us. Is that we appreciate. There was a story they said about where they would describe the different styles of davening, and they would say that some people they daven mamish ba'avodah in the cheder sheni, like you're supposed to do, but they would leave the door open in case maybe a cat would go by and a cat would be able to see them. So in other words, there's a certain appreciation for recognition that Hashem made us that we have. Now, it's hard to know when a person is being authentic or when a person is doing it because they want to be recognized. So Chabad in general shied away from outward expression. So even in davening, when it comes to certain things, it's just a story. It's a way of saying it. They're saying even if a person won't see me, at least even a cat should see me. It was just a way of saying that, like, they wanted even recognition from something. But when it comes to davening, so people express different things and they can get excited, and you never know what's real or not. So in Chabad, you notice, if you see the way that Rebbe davens, even though it says, let's say, you have to bend certain ways and how you bend. So to me, I would look at how the Rebbe does it. Is there a huge, jumping and or bending, or is it very in a very regal, calm type of way, that without blitus, as they say, not sticking out? And that's the way that Rebbe used to daven. So a lot of these things, I think we shied away from some of these things in general, because the point is that it should be, instead of chitzonius maybe leading to pnimius, it's supposed to be the other way around, pnimius, and maybe it should lead to chitzonius, but no need for that. The idea is it has to be authentic. Okay, so I'm saying that only because some of these things we don't do anyways, but I'm just trying to put into perspective how it should look. Yeah.
Two questions. Number one, you normally bow one in everyone anyway, so why did you bow extra now?
Okay, we didn't get up to there yet. Question 2? Yeah, but I didn't read that yet, so I didn't explain it yet. Question 2?
Okay, I was just, what's the reason for bowing?
Okay.
I didn't
Okay, so yeah, I'm going to say it again now. Okay, so let's say that. So now that I gave that little akdama, let's do sit base. So yesh noigin lispal b'reish Hashanah v'yom kippurim called tefillah shmoneh esrei b'kriya b'kvifa sadosh. During this time, people will during the time of Rosh Hashanah Kippur, so they'll daven shmoneh esrei while they're bent over in that way, because they're supposed to try to feel like they're in a, like they're bibittel, as we said, and therefore they want to express that in their davening. Fine. Now, the problem is like this. Person has to bend as we do. Number 1 in the bracha of Magen Avram. And ubemoidim, right? The first 3 and the last 3. And you have to do it betchila ubeseif, the beginning of the bracha and the end of the bracha. So there are times, in other words, there are times in Shmoneh Esrei when you need to bow, okay, or bend. Okay, so therefore, if you were bent the whole time, then no one's going to know you're bending. You're not going to be following what the Chachamim tell. So therefore, before you reach those places in davening, you have to stand up. The places where you're supposed to bend any day. So you have to stand up taller in order that you could then bow the way you're supposed to. So number 1, it's a little tricky. You have to know that there are certain times you have to stand up straight in order that you could bow again.
What's wrong?
Wait, hold on. Gam. Amna means like however. Now gam. Asur likroya betchilas bracha ubesayf bracha. There's another issue that in general, when you make a bracha, you're not supposed to be bowing at the beginning or the end, only in the middle. Why? Because it's b'makim shalei tiknu chazal. There are certain places where the Chachamim said you should bow, and if they don't say that, we don't bow in the beginning or the end of brachas. So now you have, besides for the beginning of Magen Avram and Moedim, when you have to stand up straight, also by every single bracha, you'd have to be standing up straight in the beginning and at the end. So now it's going to get very complicated. You're going to be up and down the whole time, and you have to remember when and when not. So therefore, the halacha is, and according to the Kitzur, and I think this is the way we do, is v'toiv yeser lispalel beivarim skufim. Better you should daven with straight limbs, meaning standing tall, or belev kafuf. And instead, your heart should be bent, ubidmais, and with tears. And it's brought down in different places about davening on Rosh Hashanah with tears and how valuable it is and whatever. But that's a side point. The point is, he's saying is that the outward expression is going to lead you to a much more complicated place. Better inside, you should have this feeling of being bent. That's a much better thing. Okay, now we come to another halacha. This is that there's different ways of how you daven, out loud or quietly. Yeah, we're talking about Shemoneh Esrei always. Now, how do we daven Shemoneh Esrei? Quietly. Where does that come from? Close. From Chana. We read about this on the Haftarah, the first day of Rosh Hashanah, when Chana went to daven for a child, which Baruch Hashem, she was blessed with Shmuel Hanavi. So she tells Eli, so Eli HaKohen thought that she was drunk. Why did he think she was drunk? Because she was davening quiet. So he saw her expressions, but he didn't hear her. So he thought she was drunk. So from there, we learn out, the Gemara, it says, Kama Hilchus Rabfasi, I think, that we learn out a lot of halachas from her, from Chana, about how to daven. If you're allowed to ask for yourself and loud and quiet, whatever, a bunch of different things. Fine. So now that we know that you're supposed to daven quietly, so comes the Kitzur and he says like this: on Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah, there's a minute people have that they daven out loud. Yeah, they're davening out loud. They want to do it differently. So according to the Kitzur, the Alter Rebbe says the same. Yesh levato. That's not a good thing to do. Why? Really, you should daven quietly like you do the rest of the year. This is al pi Kabbalah. Now, how do you do it quietly? Meaning that you hear yourself, but that you're not verbalizing the words. Now, then he says, some people say, you know what, if during Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, if you want to lift your voice a little bit, you could, but not too much. Now, what does the Alter Rebbe say, Lashon Rabbeinu? It's better to daven quietly if you could have kavanah. So in other words, according to the Alter Rebbe, if it's better for your concentration to daven a little bit out loud, you could. But if it's okay and you could daven quietly the same, better to daven quietly. Now, what does this mean? So number one, because we learn out from Chana, which happened on Rosh Hashanah. So you want to talk about Rosh Hashanah, about davening? The whole thing is that from Chana we learned out how to daven, and she did it on Rosh Hashanah, and she did it quietly. And number two, who davened out loud? Yeah, who do we know davened out loud? I don't expect you to know this, but this is the Nevi'ei Baal. The Nevi'ei Baal, in the story of the Eliyahu Navi, yeah? So it says that they made this competition, and the Nevi'ei Baal were davening out loud and fires and doing all these things, trying to do the karbanis, and it didn't work. So we see from there that davening out loud is not such a positive thing. Yeah, Eliyahu Navi did it quietly. He davened quietly, and he was answered. What? Oh, so the Chazan, it's a good question. The Chazan is a totally separate thing, and the Chazan is allowed. The person can explain because the Chazan's whole job is dafka to help everyone in their tefillos. So therefore, when he does it, he's not disturbing other people. He's actually helping other people. Now, 1 second. Now, why does the Alter Rebbe say and the Shulchan Aruch say that if a person needs and it helps them with kavanah, they could daven a little bit out loud, even though during the rest of the year we'd be a little bit more strict? So the reason is for two things. Number one, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. So there's an inyan where people are unfamiliar with the davening, yeah? So in a way, if someone's listening to you, it might help them. When I was younger, right, in 770, before they had the machzerim with all the information, yeah? So the machzer didn't have a lot of information. So if you wanted to know how you're supposed to do things right and you're a young little kid, so you look at the people next to you and you figure out, are they repeating the chazan when it comes to the piyutim? Or, right, very often the tzibur says it first, and then we say two, and then we're ahead of the chazan, right? And then we're behind the chazan, or sometimes ahead. So, right, sometimes the chazan will start, and then we say two paragraphs, the one he said plus the next one, and then he follows us, right? That's generally how it works. But when you're a kid, you don't know how to do that. So you're listening to the people next to you. So number one, on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, the davenings are not so common. So it would be better if someone does maybe a little bit out loud. And that's why we're not so opposed it if it's not going to disturb other people. And number two, Shemoneh Esrei, yeah. And number two, not out loud, like we said, but maybe if people around you could hear you, it wouldn't be so bad. And number two, another reason is because everyone has a machzer. During the year, you see people, they daven by heart, at least in those days for sure. Nowadays, not as common. But then everyone daven by heart. They didn't have sidurim common around. Mashink and a machzer, no one knew the tefillos of Rosh Hashanah and Kippur. So that, they always had a machzer that was printed. So therefore, what? Okay, I just want to finish before I gotta go. So, but the point is that we're not as concerned for disturbing other people because everyone has their own machzer. Okay, let's finish up the last two lines here. We're going to explain soon, tomorrow, that there's a lot of words that we're very, very particular about how we pronounce it on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And the reason is because it could change the whole meaning, and we want to be very careful on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur that we don't give the wrong impression. So you have to be very careful with the words. And therefore, you should pursue a very good type of machzor that's very clear and that's very meduyik, that has all the right everything. In order to be able to daven from it. Baruch Hashem, today's day and age, we're blessed with wonderful machzerim that are very, very worked on and edited and everything, so we don't have that issue. But you should try to daven through the machzor and make sure that you're not trying to do a balpeh and guess, because it's going to be a little challenging to do all that.